Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Manson saga discussion panel with me, Paul. Over there is Danny After Dark, and we are joined again by Nikolas Schreck. He did, in fact, come back.
Yes.
Well, after a little private conversation and the arrangement we made, I think the conditions are satisfactory.
Yeah, perfect.
You know
right.
What to do.
Yeah. Oh man, I'll never snitch.
That's what they all say.
Right. All right, Danny, do you want to just dive right into her?
Yeah. So in chapter 5, The Outlaw, you quoted Gail Zappa in Michael Walker's Laurel Canyon. It's a quote: "If you were surprised by the Manson murders, you weren't connected to what was going on the canyon, period."
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that quote and why Gail Zappa made that statement?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I can tell you I talked to Gail Zappa, and she confirmed that she had met Charlie at the Whiskey A Go-Go when she was the booking agent at the Whiskey A Go-Go before she married Frank Zappa. And she worked with Mario Maglieri and Elmer Valentine, who were these mobsters that owned the Whiskey A Go-Go. And so she met him early on, and as a character on the music scene. And then later he got involved with Frank Zappa musically. We went over there and jammed with Frank Zappa. She also knew Bobby Beausoleil, and independently. A lot of people knew Beausoleil and Charlie separately as two different characters in the Hollywood music scene. But Gail Zappa, she said that there were so many of these entourages, including her own, including the group around Frank Zappa. There were all these little entourages around charismatic men for the most part, all of them with their, ideology and their message. And there were so many of them. And that, of course, there was drug dealing and big money being exchanged. So nobody was surprised by what happened. None of those
I think
people,
that's big.
The way that it's presented to the general public by the official narrative is people were celebrities were horrified that maybe they're going after celebrities. No, the people in Beverly Hills and Bel Air and all over LA who were involved in the narcotics trafficking were terrified that a whole bunch of drug dealers were killed.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's
people already knew. You have to remember, these people knew who Bernard Crowe was. Terry Melcher and Dennis Wilson and Greg Jacobson knew who he was. Mama Cass knew who he was. So, okay, this guy is shot. Gary Hinman, Dennis Wilson had dealings with. He's dead. Mm-hmm. So this is a chain of fear coming. And then Sebring and Frykowski, where everyone in the Hollywood scene knows what is happening at Cielo Drive. It's not even a secret. It's a joke to pretend it's a secret. Everyone knows what's happening. They're dead. Of course, people are terrified that they are the people who have burnt people, the people involved in drug deals. They were terrified. That's why Polanski's friend, Richard Silbert, the art designer for Rosemary's Baby, made this famous statement to Newsweek. Toilets were flushing all over Beverly Hills. Now, if that was said in August, a few days after the murders, why would a close friend of Roman Polanski say that if he doesn't know exactly what it's about? Among those people, it wasn't a mystery what happened. It was a mystery maybe who did it, because there were so many culprits. And because Wojciech Frykowski was such an asshole, so many people hated him. And Sebring was so much in debt, was such a loudmouth and a gossip. There were plenty of people who had all these mob connections to Sinatra and others. It's more a guessing game who did it, but not why.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the toilets flushing everywhere, because we listened to, you mentioned in your book about Amos Russell.
Mm-hmm.
The butler.
The butler for Jay Sebring. Yeah.
The butler for Jay
Sebring. He called himself a butler, but he did everything. He was a handyman. He was his social secretary. He did everything. He was a jack of all trades, but he called himself butler.
So he says that 2 women came.
Because at one point,
yeah.
Winifred Chapman also was the maid for Sebring. So there were other people there. You know, they shared. The Polanski's maid also went over to Sebring's to clean up. So yeah.
Okay,
so Amos Russell was, anyway, he was his valet, his everything.
Right. And he says when he's being interviewed by the police that 2 women came by. Now, in your book, you name one of the women that he didn't know the name of. And the other one was, he says, Miss Charlene, who we're assuming is Charlene McCaffrey.
She is Charlene McCaffrey, who is, for people who may not know, the receptionist at Sebring International, but more importantly, the girlfriend of Joel Rostow, one of the major drug dealers to the stars, who had been robbed in a home invasion, exactly like what happened at Cielo Drive in April 15th, I believe. I'm not sure of the date. I think it was April 15th. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm ever wrong. I think they're so friendly in that way. That Joel Rostow and her were at his apartment and they were robbed of their drugs. Someone came in with a gun, 2 men, and robbed them of the drugs. Well, that was Tex. And Tex was already robbing people's drugs. And what did he do at that? He tied their hands together. He said, "Where's the stuff?" He took the drugs, and and this is typical of the whole chaos of this whole criminal constellation. He ended up shooting Rostow in the foot, and the neighbors heard it, and Tex and whoever he was with, I don't know. And actually, this was one of the points Charlie corrected. I had written in the 2011, based on erroneous information that I corrected, that it was Bruce Davis who went with Tex to do that. Charlie, when I asked him in 2008 about this Rostow robbery, I said to him, "Are you telling me Tex didn't say to you, we robbed this mob guy and he's probably going to be angry at us?" And Charlie, I quote this in the book, 2 times in his life, he did this weird, very formal way of talking in like another voice, like he was possessed by a lawyer. He said, "I am not obliged to talk about this at this time." Like some consigliere whispered it in his ear. To me, that said, yeah, of course I did.
Right.
But he didn't want to talk. But he then later said it wasn't Bruce Davis. So you don't know about it, but you know who it wasn't. And I've had quite a few conversations like that. I don't know anything about that except it was a blue Toyota. It wasn't a green Volvo. So that was a giveaway that, of course, he did know. So he said that wasn't Bruce Davis. It turned out to be true. It couldn't have been because he was in England at that time. So now Charlene McCaffrey and Rostow were robbed. And she knew.
How did you find out it was Tex? Sorry to interrupt, but I was curious how the information came out that it was Tex that robbed them.
Susan Atkins told another person that she was in prison that these robberies had gone on long before. And then another source, who I can't reveal, also said that they knew that Tex was robbing people going back to 1968, like a year before the crimes. So
interesting. Yeah. Sorry, I was going to just say, we were going to get into Tex's history of robbing. And
the important thing there is Charlie said always that the reason Tex came, he met him at Dennis Wilson's, and then they hadn't seen each other for a while, and then he contacted him and came to the ranch with Dean Morehouse. And Charlie specifically said, I don't know what this is, that he had robbed a prostitute and that he had been involved in a drug burn where he had robbed a drug dealer and he was hiding out. That's why he went to the Spahn Ranch. And Charlie said that in retrospect, he let him move into the ranch for the trade of a 1935 truck that Charlie liked.
Right.
And Charlie said in retrospect, he regretted, for he just wanted the truck. He didn't like Tex particularly. He didn't even want him to be involved with the group because he did not trust him, and said this was someone known for ripping people off and drug burns.
Right.
You know.
So no wonder it brought down a bunch of
this was what Tex Watson's MO was robbing drug dealers. And as Susan Atkins says tellingly in her Myth of Helter Skelter book, if you rob why does she say it? But she does in her book. If you rob a drug dealer, they're not going to call the cops or the Better Business Bureau.
Right.
And that this was Tex's MO from the beginning, from the very beginning. So,
right.
Yeah, so Charlene McCaffrey went back to Sebring's under Steve McQueen's supervision. Steve McQueen, who is one of Jay Sebring's best friends, did not, as far as I know, I could be proven wrong tomorrow. There could be a photograph of him in Sebring's house. I don't know. Supposedly drove up and down the street supervising people going in to get stuff out of Sebring's house before the cops came. And McQueen knew about the murders before the cops did.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was thinking what sparked my my memory about that question in particular was talking about the toilets flushing all over LA and everyone getting stoned. Amos Russell had said that he didn't notice, and it could just be him saying it, but he said that he didn't notice anybody taking anything out of the house. Do you think it was just a disposal run, so they would have not been under? Who knows?
I don't know. I don't like to speculate, you know. I mean,
right.
Amos Russell did. I heard Charlene McCaffrey was one of the people sent. She was deeply connected to the drug dealing and the narcotics through Joel Rostow. What other reason would there be to go there, to quickly go in? Amos Russell said she was kind of nervous, you know, and of course, I think Amos Russell's to a certain degree is also protecting the reputation of his employer.
Sure. Sure. And
but he knew, he heard that, you see, this was a reason, as I point out in the book, he was not used as a witness. Bugliosi didn't call on him to tell us about the people who came over to clear out Sebring's house. And who told Amos Russell something happened to Mr. J? We don't know, but he knew it well before the cops.
Right. You know? That's one of those ones where it's total missed opportunity for any sort of truth.
And I do know who the other woman was. I have discovered who she was. As I explained in the 2011 edition, I knew her first name, but I spelled it wrong. And once I got the spelling right, then I figured out exactly who it was. A young woman who lived with Tate and Polanski at Cielo Drive, a young Polish actress who was under, let's say euphemistically, under Roman's wing. You know, as he guided her. Yeah, so to speak, as he guided her in her Hollywood career. And she's mentioned in the Earl Deemer interview with him, and it's clear that Deemer knows something about that. There's a lot of questions Deemer asks. If you know what really happened, it's clear he's probing Polanski about issues. I'm digressing a bit, but for instance, Polanski pretends he never met Witold K. I know for a fact, Gene Gutowski told me he met him the night before, and when he got to LA, that Witold K is who panicky and anxiety-ridden told them this was a drug deal. Wojtek was dealing drugs. People came over to the house. He called me. This is what you have to know. So Deemer is pushing Polanski, and Polanski lies to him in this interview. Says, I never met him. I've heard about him, but he did meet him. And he even came to Paramount for this meeting that was held in Paramount in Julie Andrews' dressing room. So, you know, Deemer clearly knew who this other woman was. And I did not mention her name because she's very prominent and very wealthy now. But you can figure it out if you want to. If you put two and two, you easily can figure out who she is.
Right. Okay. I'm going to kind of switch gears quick because in the last one, I didn't get to ask you a couple questions I wanted to about the book itself.
Yeah.
Now I've gotten, luckily enough, thank you very much. You forwarded us one of the Manson file the pre
right.
book, and it's put together like just like, because I'm a fan of your music, and I like the way you put stuff together. It all feels very intentional, and with the way that this is put together, you've said before that this is a book about Manson and everything surrounding him.
Mm-hmm.
And so you broke it up into different chapters. The chapter 0 is My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, then The Philosopher, The Minstrel, The Wizard, The Beverly Hillbilly, The Outlaw, The Revolutionary, and The Soul for Sale. Can you talk a bit about the importance of how you put this together and what these different these different chapters, how they represent the man himself?
Mm-hmm. Well, people who have read the 2011 edition will realize this is the same exact chapter order as was there. One major chunk that I added, and in a way it was an advantage that we stopped printing it in 2014 after Charlie came to me with all these revisions and corrections, and I realized to my horror that I had to keep doing this.
Right.
I added, because everyone asks about it, what was the first chapter, My Life with the Thrill, or chapter 0,
Mm-hmm.
My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, is specifically answering the two questions I'm asked most. What was Charlie like? And in the other editions I got into it, but this is more of a personal explanation of I think it's very important that people know before they even read all this, who is the person that I know? I didn't know this cult leader that most people think they know. I didn't know that person because he doesn't exist. So I think it was very important to set in context, this is this complicated human being that I knew. Mm-hmm. And so therefore this person who did these things was this person, not the person you may think he was. So that was important. And then secondly, how did I get into it is the question people ask me every single day. What, and as I said in the book, kind of with the same tone that you ask a lunatic, like, when did this begin? When they're laying on the couch. And so I answer those questions in great detail and get into a bit more biographically how I was drawn into it, these bizarre connections to the case, and how, as I said, I fell down the rabbit hole of this thing when I was very young. So that is all completely new material of the chapter 0. And then the other chapters, the way I designed the book was, of course, the crimes are brought up immediately in the preface, but I have to accentuate to anyone interested, don't get this book if you think it's a true crime book, because you will be bored out of your mind reading about Manson's music in detail, about his philosophy, about his political ideas, about his ecological ideas, about, everything about the entire person. Because to me, there is nothing intrinsically interesting about these crimes. They are exactly like the Wonderland murders. They're just another grubby, they're mysterious because they've been so covered up. What is interesting about them is the degree of powerful people who have spent decades concealing what happened, and not doing a very good job of it. It's not a masterful conspiracy. It's a bunch of different people protecting their ass for different vested interests, but not all working together, and sometimes working against each other. As I point out in the book, it wasn't this grand Illuminati conspiracy. It's actually pretty flimsy. And if you take a little time, you can quickly look through the lies. So, so it's not, I want to, caveat emptor, this is not a true crime book. And if you just want to go over forensic evidence of stab wounds, I don't do that. This is about this person I got to know because I said, do you want to put out this record? And I got to know him, and it led to this. It snowballed into this. So
kind of turned into the real Manson in his own words.
Well, that was that. Yeah. Well, that, as I've said before, Charlie, originally, I wouldn't have even written the first book, the first edition. I was putting together a book about his philosophy. And as I mentioned in this book, after the 1988 edition came out and did very well, and he really liked it and tried to get it other prisoners, which is a sign of how much he liked it, because he didn't take normal civilians were not even human to him. Prisoners and the underworld were the people he respected. And so he wanted to get it. But then I mentioned in the book that he had an idea to do a follow-up called The Mind of Manson. And he had a very specific, I describe it, a way he wanted the cover to be and what it would be. And a lot of that we worked on but didn't do became The Wizard, which is a chapter about his spiritual influences, practices, philosophy, and everything to do with his metaphysical beliefs, which to me, along with his music, is by far the most important thing about him. The least important thing about him to me is that he was an accessory to this rather squalid drug deal series of murders that his friends got involved with, you know. And in no way do I mitigate his guilt. You've read it. Is there any point at which I say he's innocent or
no? That's a huge misnomer for this whole thing, is that, I mean, you put in here everything. You put in here that he was culpable for it. Of course he was a criminal, but you don't just leave it at that, which I think is interesting. And one thing, just kind of a random question to do with, I believe it's the Wizard chapter. You talk about him being like a shaman, and you've called this Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman, but I didn't realize quite what a shaman was and how there was sort of a criminality to that as well, or sort of an underworld bit to being a shaman. Can you briefly explain that?
Yeah, well, there can be. I mean, the New Age movement has kind of misinterpreted and romanticized a shaman, but when I went to Mexico myself in search of them when I was very young and looking for psychedelic drugs directly from shamanic traditions rather than the Western way of doing it, there were shamans who had spiritual abilities and wisdom, who I say in the book would cut your throat for 15 pesos. They had wisdom, and in tribal cultures all around the world, shaman, actually the word comes from a Siberian root word, but because of anthropologists like Mircea Eliade, who studied shamanism, the word has come to be used universally for the witch doctor, the curandero, the tribal spiritual guide. But shaman is actually, it's from Siberia. Charlie was that. I believe that's what he was. You are born to be a shaman or you're not. And if he was in a tribal society, that's what he would have been. His speaking in tongues, his oracular, veiled way of communicating truths, all of that, and his connection with nature, his feeling that spirits came into him and spoke through him, which he sincerely believed and which I believe. But that doesn't mean that you're a good person. And I think a lot of New Age people think, oh, but he was a mean, murderous, etc. Yeah, but so shamans are used to do black magic in tribal society. They are experts in how to kill people through sorcery. And these are things Charlie was very interested in too, is using them, like he said many times, I don't need a weapon. I do it with my mind. So he, people think I'm crazy to say, how could he be a shaman? And also, as I point out in the book, he was a shaman in potentia. He never had the training. He never, it's a traditional thing. You need to be trained. But a lot of his problems in life, I believe, were because that's what he was, and he never got to become that. You see? So he had the spiritual gift, like he had a musical gift, and he frankly, he squandered both of them. In my opinion, it's a tragedy. He had wisdom, he had spiritual understanding on a very high level, but he had this other side of him, money and greed and crime, and immediately gravitating to that. And his music, you can hear me, I said it to him, I was drawn to your creative side, not your destructive side. And I never made any bones about that. And I never did get into his criminal pursuits, which he constantly tried to drag me into. as he did with everyone he knew. And did that happen on the ranch? Sure, I can see it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it did. He tried to do it with me 100 times.
Yeah, and
You know.
that's yeah.
And I mean, and when you say did he manipulate people to do things, it just came naturally. Like I described my first meeting with Newell Emmons. I hardly knew Charlie, and he's saying, you know, go to Channel 5 and tell Newell Emmons this. Now, a weak person who's looking for a father figure and a leader, which I'm not looking for, would say, yes, Charlie, you know, and you listen to many of these conversations that people have with Charlie, you know, he's saying, you know, so the pyramids are built by Theodore Roosevelt, and I went down to the submarine in 1922, and you, motherfucker, didn't even know about the whole finances of what was going on in that particular situation. And someone will say, yes, Charlie, but I would ask him, well, wait, what do you mean by that? Are you saying this? Are you saying that? So I tried to understand what he was saying, and he would then, you know, like he would often say, you people did this to me. And I'd say, I didn't do anything to you. Leave me out of it. And he'd say, well, and then he'd go in another voice, like this was the person who was dictating to the Manson character. He'd say, no, man, I'm saying you people, like you are the world, but I'm, you know, like he would back off from that persona to explain it if you gave him time to. Now, very few people did that. Like his sycophants and his fans just, yes, Charlie, and they don't know what the hell he's saying or care. And then his detractors are, let's get back to the murders. Why did you hypnotize these people to start a race war? So either way, but if you took your time with him and well, wait, what do you mean by that? Because you said here, this, and it doesn't quite, and he would take the time to explain it.
Right. Okay.
And he would often say, you know, to everyone, like, does that communicate to you? Do you know what I mean? Because he felt like he wasn't being understood. And, you know, so I tried to decipher what he was saying, but you had to ask him.
Right.
If you just let him ramble and rant, he would go on for 10 hours. And, you know, like one funny thing he said to me, which I've said before, he said, you know, we've got a problem in communication. You keep trying to say something.
Oh, fucking perfect. Okay, so we've gone through a couple more of these questions. You went a little bit into, because we bounced back, but you went a little bit into Joel Rostow. Switching gears again, and Joel Rostow and Gino Massaro are two very important people in this that I didn't hear about until I really started looking into it. There are another couple people left off the main thing. So can you briefly explain who they are and what they have to do with this, other than what you've said about him being a drug dealer and being ripped off by Tex?
Right. Well, Joel Rostow was a low-level mafia-connected guy from Boston, which is interestingly where Linda Kasabian came from. I don't have any reason to think they had a connection, though they certainly might have, because they were in the same world. They were both dealing acid in Boston and in Los Angeles. So like the Canadian connection, like you, there's a Canadian connection to this crime. Ian Quarrier and the whole Canadian contingent of drug dealers bringing the MDA to Wojtek Frykowski. There's also a Boston thing of the Kasabians and Joel Rostow coming to LA, acid dealers coming to LA. So Joel Rostow was the crime partner of Gino Massaro, who was another much more deeply involved mob guy, although Rostow had connections to various so-called syndicates and families. He worked for several in New England, New Jersey, and a few others, and in New York City. And I'm not going to get into it, but the book gets into great detail on this mafia scam, huge thing of stealing valuables and money at JFK Airport, which Joel Rostow was very much a part of.
And where he was found dead, coincidentally.
Where he was beaten to death and left in the back of a car with blood pouring out of it that the cops found in his underwear with his head beaten in right before the trial began.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the most likely person to have killed him is his crime partner, Gino Massaro, who was in possession of Rostow's gun when the police came to interrogate him. He was never convicted. Now, to get into Gino Massaro, very briefly, because that's a whole show in itself, as you well know and have probably handled, in Tex's memoir, which is a transcription of the legendary and much hyped Tex tapes. Well, that book, Will You Die For Me, Reverend Hoekstra, this scammy Christian evangelist who tried to make a reputation by getting infamous criminals to become born-again Christians, he had access to the Tex tapes. And in Will You Die For Me, Tex writes this casual comment that the family's mafia vending machine connection is who Bernard, theoretically was who he was fronting this money that he stole from Crow. That, in other words, he was going to go buy this amount of weed for 2,000 something bucks that he stole from Crow and Kroner, and was going to pay this mafia vending machine. Well, the best way to understand this, look at the Manson Mythos blog. Dennis LaCalandra has done incredible, precise, detailed research proving that Gino Massaro was indeed, we knew he was connected to a vending machine operation from the FBI report, which has been common knowledge for quite some time. But if you go to the Manson Mythos blog, and you will see that Dennis has gone deeply into the history of this vending machine company, Discomat, which was a front for a major New England narcotics operation run by Patriarca, who was the feared head of the New England syndicate. And Massaro was on the board of that group. And Charlie, so you really got to look at this research. It's incredible what it absolutely shows, that Discomat, this vending machine operation, was part of a major narcotics operation. And if I haven't made myself clear enough, that's what this whole thing is about, is there was a major international drug dealing ring on the highest level, not just street criminals. What we saw at Cielo Drive was like the curtain opened for a second and you got a flash and you saw a little bit, but everything beyond it ties into Discomat, Gino Massaro, Joel Rostow, and these major drug dealers. And one thing I want to point out about Massaro in the book, if anyone doubts that Tex Watson knew Gino Massaro, this is proof that they were in the same world. In 1968, there was a robbery exactly like what Tex did to Rostow and McCaffrey, exactly like what Tex did to Sebring and Frykowski, exactly like, what Tex's MO. Gino Massaro, dressed up in a police uniform with several other criminal associates, and broke into another criminal's apartment house and said, "Where's the stuff?" Exactly like Tex did with Joel Rostow. And they were trying to rob cocaine, and they were trying to avenge themselves on another burn. Too complicated to explain here. But this endless cycle of burns and drug deals. Gino Massaro,
people trying to get one over on each other.
Right. And that's all that happened with Cielo. That's what that was about. Gino Massaro was shot almost fatally during this break-in. And someone who was in the house was a guy named Ivars Apanitis, which is an extremely unique name. I believe there's only one on the planet. And Ivars Apanitis was later directly connected to Tex Watson's lawyers, Deloach and Walshin. And if you don't know who those two people are, they showed up after Tex was arrested in McKinney, Texas. They showed up in Dallas and said, "We are Tex Watson's lawyers and we're here to represent him." And the judge said, "Get the hell out of here." Tex said, "I don't want to see these people." Well, they were later disbarred for major narcotics trafficking, pimping, running massage parlors that were whorehouses, all kinds of crimes. They were very high-level criminals, and they knew Tex since 1968 and had worked with him. So here's the smoking gun. When Ivars Apanitas, this guy who you will remember was involved in the break-in and shooting that Massaro was involved in, Ivars Apanitas was arrested in the 70s for flying a plane filled with cocaine from South America. Major drug dealing. This is not just Bernard Crow on the street corner. This is a major, very well-funded, sophisticated narcotics trafficking organization. Ivars Apanitas was working with Walshin and Deloach. So that is a direct connection. And I called him. I tracked him down and I called him. And when I called him, he was immediately hostile to me. Although he didn't even know who it was, immediately hostile. I said, as I often did, to get into because if you say the M word, the phone's down immediately for the most part.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, it's probably a bullshit artist. For the most people, anyone who enthusiastically wants to come forward and tell you something is usually lying. It's the people who don't want to talk to you that you want to talk to. So I said, well, I'm working on a book on the music industry in the late 60s, which is vaguely true, kind of true.
Sure.
And,
there's reference.
And he said, yeah, like he didn't believe me. And I said, can I ask you some questions? Because I had seen an FBI, and when I said FBI, he cut me off at report. He said, I don't have anything to say to you. I have nothing to say to you. I say, can I, and I always try this, can I ask you one question? And now he's even angrier. And he says, one. And I say, how well did you know Charles Watson and Gino Massaro? And he said, if you ever call me again, you're dead. And hung up on me.
Jesus.
So now if I was him, I'd say, that was 50 something years ago. I really don't remember those names. Sorry.
Right.
But he was angry. I think nobody had mentioned this to him. And he is an absolute link between Tex Watson's criminal drug dealing lawyers who have a long history of drug dealing and Gino Massaro, which connects it to Rostow. And then we get into Horn Avenue.
Which is exactly what I was going to say. There's another connection of people because Horn Avenue, with, like you were saying, the apartment that has to do with Lots of Papa. It also has to do with Gino Massaro
and Joel Rostow.
And Joel Rostow. If you want to just expand on that a little bit and say what you know of it.
It's in the book for pages. I have a chapter called Horn, about Horn, and I get back to it again and again. It would be too detailed to get into here, but let's put it this way. Joel Rostow, who delivered drugs to Cielo Drive to Sebring the night of the murders, who is the boyfriend of Charlene McCaffrey, Jay Sebring's receptionist, has a criminal operation going on at Horn Avenue. In another apartment, Bernard Crow, who Charlie shot and who Tex Watson ripped off at Rosina Kroner's apartment on Franklin, is running another sophisticated criminal operation in the same building. And they're very similar. They're making fake IDs and, not blue collar crime, not drug dealing, but, fake passports and this kind of thing. Fake credit cards, which is interesting because Charlie's commune survived on fake credit cards and credit card scams of every kind. So you got two people that no one ever thought of being connected there. And as I explain in the book, on the day of the murders, Frykowski is asked by Sebring to take a young woman who supposedly is Sebring's last conquest, Susan Peterson, to drop her off where? That very street, a very short street, Horn, near Sunset Boulevard, which I used to go by a million times because the old on Sunset Strip, the Tower Records, the legendary Tower Records was there. It's right there. It's an incredibly short street.
Right.
And
it's around the Go-Go. It's around everywhere.
It's right in the center of everything that Charlie was involved with. So we got Rostow and Crow running criminal operations on a very short street that Frykowski goes to drop off one of Sebring's girlfriend on the same street. And you got Diane Linkletter living in the house across the way. But, and you can look this up in the police reports, Bobby Jameson, a singer-songwriter, a little bit like Charlie, who was considered to be, he's going to be the next big thing, and he had a bad temperament and really didn't get along with people. Bobby Jameson, who appeared, by the way, in the film Mondo Hollywood that has Sebring and Beausoleil in it, and that's a whole other thing. How did Sebring and Beausoleil get into that movie? I found that out. You got this cluster of people. Diane Linkletter supposedly killed herself by jumping out of the window across the street from that same building where Crow and Rostow are. But she's with Ed Durston, who was believed by the police to be one of the suspects at Cielo Drive. And her boyfriend, living in Horn Avenue, was a guy named Harvey Dariff, who several people said, including the police who interviewed them, was delivering drugs to Cielo Drive that night. Do you fully conceive this tiny street? All of these people are connected on that one street.
Right.
Finally, if that's not enough to be suspicious and make you think this is the network from which all of it came, which seems very likely to me, you also have, why did Tex, and this is one of the major things Charlie corrected about my 2011 edition, was I had based it on what I'd heard that they succeeded at Cielo Drive to get a lot of drugs. Charlie was adamant that it failed in some way, I don't know why, and that what happened the next night was contingent on some failure. I can't define it more than that. Something went wrong. Right. They didn't get enough money. They didn't get enough drugs. And he said, now, I've said this commonly enough, I think people know that Charlie told me that he took money from the La Biancas. That was the purpose of that whole thing. Whatever other motives may be and whatever connections there are, which I get into all of that in the book, the ultimate goal was to rob them, and he took money to the Straight Satans to pay the Straight Satans off in Venice because they were extorting him about Beausoleil and Crow, which they knew about.
Right.
What he implied and I tried to get more details, and it makes me again wonder, what did he do when he went back? Did he look for drugs? Another thing I wonder, did he know there were films there that he took? That's completely speculative. I want to make that clear. But knowing Charlie, did he have other motives to go back alone or with one person? Because he often mentioned something obsessively even. He mentioned acid in the LSD tabs in the refrigerator at Cielo Drive. Did he see them? Did he take them? Again, that's speculation. But the point here is he implied that whatever was taken from Cielo was brought to somebody else, exactly as he had brought money and what he said valuables to the Straight Satans. Well, where did Tex go? He didn't go right back to Spawn. He went to Sunset, to this gas station. Where is that gas station? It was at the end of Horn. So is that an incredible coincidence that all of these things on one day happened? Frykowski, Sebring's girlfriend. You've got places where Crow and Rostow and Linkletter and Dariff and Durston are all connected. And the piece de resistance, it's in the FBI report of Eugene Massaro. Where did he move when he moved from Florida to California? To that very apartment house on Horn.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible. That place is just a mystery wrapped in a riddle, like
but
crazy.
you know, it's hardly been mentioned. If you're not an aficionado of the case, you wouldn't even know about it. But
Right.
it is suspicious beyond belief. Now, to why is it connected? What was the connection? We don't know, and I don't pretend I know. But
Right.
if Charlie robbed the LaBiancas to pay back the straight Satans, is it possible that Tex went there to pay back Crow or Rostow, who
Right.
he had dealings with? Why did Crow never retaliate for nearly being killed? It is very unusual in the underworld. Someone comes who you know who it is, you know where they live, they come and nearly kill you. Usually there are repercussions.
Right.
Why weren't
Sure.
there? I'm only bringing up the idea. I don't claim to know, nor did Charlie even hint. He just said, whatever they took, they brought it to someone, and it actually didn't help them out too much. Therefore, the next night, which was successful.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing, Danny, if you want to chime in, you said that there might have been something, they didn't get something or whatever, and now there was a shortage of drugs for some reason.
Well, that's
right?
another thing that definitely Tex said, I want it when he called Sebring or Frykowski. I don't know who. I've heard so many stories about that. I don't know if he called Frykowski or he called Sebring. I lean towards Sebring to make an appointment. I'm going to come over with this amount of money. I want this. And a lot of people were doing that night. This party that everyone was going to was dropping by to pick up drugs on a Friday night in Los Angeles. That's what the party all these celebrities were going to was. There was no party.
Right.
He made an arrangement, and part of it was, I want acid. And apparently, Rostow did not bring the LSD that was needed. Now, Charlie says there was acid in the refrigerator. So again, there are conflicting reports. In no way do I claim to know which of those is true, but that's what I've mostly heard, is that there was an argument. Okay, I want the acid, and Sebring said, well, I don't have it, and Rostow apparently didn't have it. And you were beginning with this, a possibility that I have had raised, and we can get into this, was that the connection that Joel Rostow said, I'll be back with the acid, but he never came back, was Rosemary LaBianca. That has been suggested and hinted at by 4 different people who are not connected with each other. I don't know if it's true, and I believe there are many other motives for the LaBianca thing, but it bears bringing up. And the people who claimed that that was what went on, in a roundabout way, Vern Plumley, who is one of these rather unknown ordinary crooks, AWOL military veteran who was a thief and, basically just an ordinary crook on the ranch, he absolutely claimed that there was a direct connection in the drug dealing of LaBianca, that the LaBiancas and the Tates, as he called them, had some kind of drug betrayal. He claimed very early on that was what went on. I absolutely believe there is a connection between the 2 victims, that the victims knew each other in some way.
Right.
Absolutely believe that. And I believe the connection is Sebring and LaBianca. It seems to, I've explained this even today in the Abraxas Circle Facebook group. Everything from many different angles points to people saying Sebring and LaBianca was the connection between these 2 crimes. Lino LaBianca.
Right.
So the people who claim this, Susan Atkins told women that she was involved with in prison, 2 different ones, that there was an argument, Tex and Sebring, that had something to do with the betrayal of the LaBiancas directly. Ian Quarrier, who is this drug dealer, very important to the case. We haven't really even talked about him, but he is crucial to the whole case. Claimed that he knew everyone involved. He told a lot of people in this brief period after the murders, before he went totally crazy and was locked up in the famous Bedlam insane asylum in England, that he knew everyone, that he knew all of them. He knew LaBianca's, he obviously knew Roman and Sharon and Sebring. He was there at the house often. He was there the day of the murders, and he was possibly there after the murder. So Quarrier is very important. He claimed Rosemary LaBianca. He knew her, and he lived near her through a drug dealing connection. Yeah, so that these are all things that have to be, but I don't know, because I think there are many other reasons and motives for the LaBianca thing. I don't necessarily know that it was about drugs particularly. It could have been, likely that it could have been, but there are many other factors.
Considering all the drug dealing things that were happening at the time and how much
right. But an important thing is that Gypsy claimed, and other people have too, that, and LaBianca's first wife, Alice, both confirm there was a break-in at the LaBiancas the weekend before they were murdered. And they also were at Lake Isabella. Someone broke in then. That was immediately after the Beausoleil killing. The Cielo thing hadn't happened yet. So another possibility, they were already trying to get money to either, and there were all these chaotic plans, get a lawyer for Bobby, pay off the Straight Satans. For some reason, they desperately needed money. So they were already targeting the LaBiancas a weekend before the Cielo Drive murders. So that adds a whole other layer of mystery to the case. So get into some of your questions, though. That's enough digression.
I was going to ask in regards to, well, two questions. The timeline, you've spoken about the timeline at Cielo Drive, and I was just wondering what you felt the series of events were that happens that night. And then also in the book, you referenced some interesting revelations about Steve Apparent. Can you talk about those?
It's so complicated. I'd rather people read the book about it, because the timeline, it's you have to see it's like Rashomon, this movie, where you can look at it from different angles. The first timeline I ever heard was Charlie said in, I forget, sometime in the 86, 87 period, there's a guy getting out of San Quentin. He's been here for years. I want you to meet him. He will tell you some things I can't tell you. So I went to Northern California to meet this ex-con who was like central casting ex-con. Tattoos, buffed, Aryan Brotherhood mustache, everything. And very temperamental and seemingly ready to snap at a second. I'm sure he was back in San Quentin within the week. Very friendly and very respectful of Charlie. And if Charlie said, talk to me, he was very hospitable. I met him, and he told me what he said Charlie told him was the timeline, which I explain in the book. I don't know if it's true. That's what Charlie felt was necessary to have me go from LA to Northern California to meet a fellow inmate who he seemed to trust, who said, here's what it is. And then I told Charlie on the phone, okay, I met so-and-so. And he said, who? And I said, and I said, I don't know who you mean. And I said, come on. And he, I don't know anyone named that. And I got the point. And he did that kind of thing a few times.
Right.
Whatever he was doing, mind games or who knows, it was important enough for him to do that. And he never mentioned that again. That was the first time I heard a timeline, which I explain in the book. So I've heard so many different versions of it. I'm not complete. I would never say, I think there are huge factors we don't know.
Right.
I've heard so many credible reports from people on the fringes of it all. And I don't mention this in the book because I usually, if I don't have 3 different sources for something, I don't have any reason to believe it to be true. And I don't. I even heard that they went over first, got into an argument about something, left, and came back that very night. Possibly. but I can't prove that. I heard that they came over a little bit earlier, got into an argument, and then went back, but I didn't, so I've heard so many different explanations of the timeline. And as you will see in the book, one of them, which Charlie didn't deny, and usually there were points where he would say, this is wrong, from the 2011 book. He said, this isn't right, it was this or that, or that's not right.
Right.
And one story I heard was that they left in a panic and that Abigail and Wojtek were not dead yet.
Right.
And that they just panicked and assumed they were dead because they were so drugged, and then came back and finished them off. That's
right.
another thing. That Sebring was not dead yet, that he was bleeding to death in the bushes, and that they
right.
shot him later, and that was the gunshot that one of the neighbors heard much later in the middle of the night. There's hundreds of factors to be considered, and after everything I've heard, I can only report, here's what I heard.
What have you heard about undercover FBI agents the night of Cielo Drive and the lobby?
Yes. This a disgruntled FBI agent claimed that
I'll be right back. I'm sorry, I just heard something crazy outside. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Everything's all good. Keep going.
All right. How is anyone not going to think that's mysterious? Well, we'll never see him again. That's for sure. That's about the worst timing in an interview I've ever seen, I think.
You know what?
Okay.
It's that you can expect that for him. That's why
Right.
I'm here, Nikolas.
Right. Well, we won't admit that we know exactly what's going to happen, and we arranged it. But anyway, we're totally innocent of whatever may happen to Paul. So that's weird. Your phone wires are cut. Where were we before?
The FBI undercover.
A disgruntled FBI officer claimed to a source I believe to be reliable that a lot of what was covered up was not because of some sinister plot, but because the FBI were watching Sebring and Rostow, and a sting operation was going to be done because of not the narcotics, but money laundering and something to do with this New York JFK airport theft thing and other things that Rostow was involved in, that they were following these people, and they didn't get them.
It was a close You know what happened? Just a quick interlude.
Yeah.
2 cats just rammed into my door that were fighting. I see it, and outside,
that's the way this thing is.
There's hair everywhere. I'm like,
right.
What is that?
Right.
That's the way it goes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that now there is a perfect example. If people don't believe that this thing attracts uncanny energy, it absolutely, if you talk about it long enough, you'd be calling up demons in a few minutes, so
it literally scared the shit out of me.
It's
just all of a sudden.
Well, that's a perfect
Bang!
example. That's a perfect example of what I mentioned in the early part of the book, this element X. There is something, it isn't about secret societies or occult organizations. There is a metaphysical undercurrent to this thing that attracts mayhem and disorder of that kind. And the perfect timing of that, when we're talking about why did these people come to this house, it couldn't be
something
better.
Goes crazy. And
right.
Man.
And there were 26 cats roaming around Cielo Drive, of course. That's another factor. There were wild cats wandering around the property. So
that sounds like a dream.
Yeah.
I believe that some of them were Candice Bergen's left over, but I don't have a chapter about the cats of Cielo Drive.
Nikolas.
Maybe I'll just do the animals, Christopher the dog, and
the animals of Cielo Drive.
All right, I'll give the book a 4-star rating instead of a 5.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, the claim from a disgruntled FBI agent was that a lot of what was covered up was because of sheer embarrassment that they were hanging around, parked down the street, listening to people, that they were wired, and they fell asleep on the job, and these murders happened. And supposedly, the police say absolutely the LaBiancas were also under surveillance We don't know for what reason or by whom, but it's in the police report.
Yep.
And, I believe a lot of what was covered up is not only to do with the protecting of celebrity reputations of sexuality and drug abuse, and obviously clear connection to crime and an underworld, but also sheer embarrassment of various law enforcement people who were looking at Manson, were looking at Sebring. And the CIA contingent say Charlie was a CIA stooge who they let him get away with everything. Well, Sebring was getting away with everything. Frykowski was getting away with everything. All of these people were indulging in open and flagrant criminality on a constant basis. Nobody stopped them. So,
Right.
But I think that's credible. I think it's credible that a lot of the cover-up has more to do with bureaucratic embarrassment at their incompetence at letting. Also, it would have blown this undercover operation if they got into it.
Right. Is that how you feel Nixon got involved in the cover-up?
I don't know. I think that's very important. That is crucial. The president of the United States was clearly asked to intervene, to do what he did. Mm-hmm. And as I've said many times, and I quote it in the book, it's not just that a lawyer, a very shrewd lawyer who never made a move without thinking of the political consequences of what he was doing and saying, and a criminal, a very sophisticated criminal who was at a point where he is telling his henchmen in the White House to go commit a burglary of the Brookings Institute.
Yep.
He happens to bring up a year later, and I've quoted it before, this is very important. He says, well, they were so worried about that Manson thing. Sometimes, I knew exactly what I was doing. Sometimes you got to win a case in the press, like with Alger Hiss. And that he's talking about a supposed Russian spy that he destroyed his reputation back in his earlier red baiting days. So how crucial is that the president of the United States is even thinking about the Manson case in the midst of ordering the Watergate burglaries, the Brookings Institute burglaries, and it's on the secret tapes and it's publicly available.
Right. Now, Chaos and COINTELPRO, those things, seeing as we're talking CIA and stuff right now, those were two things that were like COINTELPRO was FBI, CIA had Chaos, and it was both things to destabilize the left. Mm-hmm. Now, this is the perfect thing set up on
I would say also not only the left, but the right. And I have seen in my own life with right-wing extremist groups, people that I knew, FBI sending infiltrators, agent provocateur. I've seen it firsthand, and I know that they do that.
Right.
And
so do you think
bugging people, tracking them down, encouraging violence to see who will do it? I think that happened with the Weathermen and with a lot of left-wing groups as well.
So do you think that with the way that this all went down, that has anything to do with the murders, or just that it was sort of a happy little accident that all of a sudden this murder comes to light and the people that did it look like these hippies that, they're trying to...
Well, what are you asking specifically? Do I think that intelligence agencies engineered these murders to stop the 60s or stop the hippie movement?
More just that, do you think that there was anybody in there who were provocateurs, who were like, if they heard something, they were like, yeah, we should do this? Or do you think that because we know that Nixon knew about it, he said we knew what we were doing with the Manson?
I don't think Nixon knew about the Spahn Ranch or ever knew about...
No, I just mean about the case.
Irving Kanarek, who mostly talked nonsense in the trial,
right? Mm-hmm.
Charlie's defense lawyer, he says it right in the trial transcript. He says, I cannot prove it, but I believe that Evel Younger, this is a very controversial and brave thing to say at that moment, is who's responsible for Nixon interfering. He says it in the trial on the record, and I believe that's true. Right. Evel Younger was a very close friend of Ronald Reagan, the then governor, which is a whole other level, the Reagan involvement.
Right.
So Irving Kanarek said it openly in the trial. I believe Evel Younger, who was Vincent Bugliosi's boss, who was known among his colleagues and friends, the way that lawyers behind Bugliosi's back called him the bug, Younger was called Evil Younger.
Right.
So, I mean, he was known to be corrupt and barbaric and destructive. And so I think that, you know, I don't, to make it quite simple, I don't believe the CIA or FBI or anyone planned the Cielo murders. This is putting the cart before the horse.
Right.
Like all politicians, as we see in the culture wars in the United States today, anything that happens is leaped upon by partisan political parties to make their point.
Yeah.
So, of course, hippies, LSD, free love, dropping out of society leads to killing pregnant women. That's perfect for their propaganda. Did they make it happen? No, that's absolute nonsense. I think it's idiotic. You know, and it's assuming that intelligence agencies have capabilities and a competence that they have proven they don't have. You know,
right. And how do you mean about that?
They're not. Well, the CIA is not Spectre. You know, they've failed a lot. We know a lot of their secrets. You know, they didn't know the Soviet Union was falling apart until it did, but they can control people's minds, and it's just nonsense. I think that the CIA connection, which I made clear in the 2011 edition, is with the Polish exiles, which makes perfect sense because during the Cold War, which people forget, the Cold War was happening in 1969. Tension between the Soviet Union and their satellite states and the NATO nations was very tense. Polish exiles are coming to California, and the FBI is definitely looking at them. And the CIA definitely talked to Jerzy Kosinski, who is this writer who introduced Wojtek Frykowski to Abigail Folger in New York at his apartment. Jerzy Kosinski, you can look up. Many people believe him to be deeply connected to the CIA as an asset. Witold K., Gene Gutowski, another thing people are going to jump on in my book. Gene Gutowski was deeply involved with intelligence. And I don't think it had anything to do with planning the crime. But one reason he was able to figure out what happened and who was where is he had State Department connections. And since the end of World War II, Roman Polanski's friend Gutowski was recruited into the OSS and Army intelligence because he could speak Polish, German, he could interrogate German officers, and he was called the operator because he was so skillful.
Oh, interesting.
People who believe in mind control and CIA, when they read how deeply connected Gutowski always was to intelligence, are going to jump to wrong conclusions. But the CIA connections are with Frykowski, with Jerzy Kosinski. Why would they not be? Of course, intelligence agencies are going to say these are a bunch of foreigners from a hostile communist nation. Are they double agents? Who are they working for? What are they doing? And when the daughter of an Army intelligence officer ends up dead next to a Polish exile who has a very murky and confusing background story, he claimed to be involved in the communist leadership and his visa is not quite regular. The FBI and CIA definitely thought, what is this? Is it a wet op? Is it an intelligence? They found it wasn't, but they certainly looked into it. So, so there is a CIA connection, but it is totally explainable. It's during the Cold War, and you've got foreign nationals from a hostile communist nation, which is to be expected. Some of them would be double agents.
That's why, and we've spoken about before, that it takes a real knowledge of the times, the 60s and what was going on and like what was happening with the CIA.
That's why I spend a lot of time in my book to set the times are crucial. And I mean, one thing about the times I think is important to stress, as I've compared it, not a metaphor, it's an exact comparison. If you take the prohibition of alcohol in America that happened during the gangster period of Al Capone and that crime wave. The prohibition of alcohol led to the mob moving in on alcohol distribution, and it led to a wave of murders and violence all across America.
Right.
Out of that came Sidney Korshak, who was an associate of Al Capone, you know, and he moved to Hollywood, and he took over Hollywood for the Chicago mob. He was the Chicago mob's man in Hollywood.
Right.
What happened in 1969 started, and I explain this in this chapter, Controlled Substances. These were not the first hippie murders. It started in Haight-Ashbury in 1966 when the federal government outlawed the sale of LSD and many other psychedelic drugs. They immediately became attractive to organized crime. And organized crime swooped in the distribution. And people were killed very quickly after that happened. And I get into the Super Spade case and other very grotesque hippie murders in Haight-Ashbury that occurred when Charlie and the commune were there.
Right.
And again, I'm supposed to be this great Manson apologist. Charlie told me many times, hinted that he had something to do with Super Spade's death, with the death of this drug dealer. He hinted it to me, to Paul Krasner, to Ed Sanders, and he, in this writing he offered for the first Manson file, The Black-White Bus, he describes a confrontation with a black drug dealer that he later told me was Super Spade. So you got to look into Haight-Ashbury already had very bizarre psychedelic drug murders happening. Charlie and the commune leave and go to LA, and then they happen again. And what is that like? It's exactly like prohibition outlaws alcohol, the mob moves in, people get killed. 1966, psychedelics are banned and outlawed. The syndicate moves in on these hippie drug dealers, and there's a competition for a lot of money. Once something's illegal, it's very lucrative. So the prohibition gangsters, you know, is what happened again when America's insanity of constantly trying to, with this Puritan effort to ban recreational drugs like they did with alcohol, it leads to murder. And that's what happened. And I think that's something everybody misses about this.
Right. I think so too. It shows a real down-to-earth connection to the mob. And also with all that stuff happening, law enforcement and how it dealt with anything to do with the hippies in Haight-Ashbury. They were just leaving people to die and OD in the road. Like everything was not nice. It was an intense time.
No, nor should it be romanticized in any way. It wasn't nice. It wasn't some utopia. It very quickly Haight-Ashbury turned into a center of rape, abuse, exploitation, and drug deal burning, you know. And it was reported at the time, but everyone remembers it through this utopian marijuana cloud of peace and love. Well, it wasn't like that, you know. It was dangerous. And Charlie brought the commune away from Haight because it was dangerous for young women to be there.
Right. And there was also a big biker presence there as well. So it brings
the biker aspect of it is huge. This is not about how hippies turned evil. It's about hippies trusted bikers. You could say the same with Mick Jagger thinking, oh, we need security for this concert. Well, okay, the Grateful Dead have used the Hells Angels, we'll use them too. There's a great deal of naivete on the part of these very young, inexperienced rock musicians and counterculture people getting involved with, you know, biker gangs that are murderous. And they thought, well, they're wearing the costume of the counterculture, they must be like us.
Right.
The real history of the death of the 60s, this narrative that mostly conservatives tell to say, look at how evil hippies really were and look where it went. Without the straight Satans in the Charlie story, the murders don't happen the way they happen. It's about the straight Satans extorting Charlie. It's about Danny DiCarlo and the straight Satans making the Beausoleil-Hinman conflict happen that wouldn't have happened without DeCarlo and the Straight Satans pushing it to happen. Same with Altamont. That it wasn't about hippies acting evil and crazy. That's a total misreporting. It's about bikers doing what bikers do and trusting bikers. So that's, those two things are a very important part of it that are left out of the narrative. And it has nothing to do with cults. It has nothing to do with any metaphysical belief whatsoever. It has to do with organized crime. Bikers on drugs are violent and like to be violent. It's very simple.
Right. And okay, so while we're on this sort of topic with the mob and stuff, we've heard you've mentioned in other interviews the connection of Manson to Alvin Karpis and Frankie Carbo. So we don't need to get too much into their relationship, but you found some interesting information about Frankie Carbo trying to hook Manson up with a job.
Yeah, and I actually today I'm going through some cassettes of my old conversations with Charlie. I found the first one, and I can share it with you maybe later in the future, where he's describing. I say to him in the conversation, I just listened to it today, coincidentally, and trying to transcribe these old cassettes to digital. He's saying, I said, so you knew that Frankie Carbo knew La Bianca? He said, yes. And I said, and you owed La Bianca a favor. I mean, you owed Carbo a favor because he tried to get you a job. I'm mistaken. I just heard it, so I remember. I said, he tried to get you work in these San Francisco nightclubs. Charlie said, no, Baltimore. He tried to get me, he got me a job at the Trocadero nightclub in Baltimore. And then he explained what that was. And then I looked into it in great detail and found it was the center of the mob in Baltimore. Frankie Carbo, one of the most important mobsters in America, one of the most powerful syndicate kingpins, went out of his way to get Charlie a job in Baltimore at the Trocadero. And it's weird that you mention it because I found that particular conversation. And then I researched it, and the FBI did a huge report on the Trocadero as a seething hotbed of prostitution and criminality. And you can see what the real job they were hiring Charlie for was not night manager, but glorified pimp, it looks like, because it was a strip club or adult entertainment club, burlesque, and the girls were made available after hours. So
it seems to be kind of like 3-star, the Trocadero, the Black Bus,
the important thing about that, and Charlie said, I wish I had done that, because he said at least the mob pays you, not like the music industry. And he meant it. He wasn't being sarcastic. He meant, I wish I just, he felt like the organized crime was more honest than the Melchers and the Wilsons. So the important thing about that, if you know Charlie, Frankie Carbo, an incredibly powerful person in the underworld, went out of his way for this nobody because he liked him. They became very close friends when they were in prison together. Did him this favor. Well, you owe Frankie Carbo a favor. And he told me, I said, you're telling me you didn't know Lino LaBianca, but Carbo knew LaBianca. He said, yes. Well, put two and two together.
Yeah.
I need money. Who could give me money right away? Who could pay me? Or where's money? And I then found out Frankie Carbo was in prison in 1969, much later. And I asked Charlie, well, how do you commute? Did you write to Carbo? What? He said he knew again, tying to prostitution, a guy who knew Carbo, who ran a brothel in Nevada out in the desert. And he was Carbo's middleman on the outside, exactly like Charlie later had his middleman on the outside. And his implication was he got messages from this guy out in the Nevada desert from Carbo. But that is crucial. And a lot of things that happened in 1967 in Terminal Island, these favors, Phil Kaufman, I'll introduce you to Universal Studios. A lot of favors were given to Charlie, and I believe he called them in when he was desperate and needed money. But that is, I think, crucial, that Carbo and that's how Charlie was. He agreed to do Newell Emmons' book simply because he owed him a favor in the underworld. So
it was a type of currency.
Yes, and so what favor did Carbo say to Charlie? You know, how did he pay? How you owe me one? Is Charlie's whole life was about this? You owe me one. What did he owe Carbo? Now, what is puzzling about that, and I don't know the answer to it, and I make it clear the Waverly thing is infinitely more mysterious than the Cielo. If Carbo knew La Bianca, and Carbo apparently was owed money from this compulsive gambler, La Bianca, that's what Charlie implied. What a miraculous coincidence that Charlie happens to go to parties at the door next door, house next door, and that Linda Kasabian also, a year before that, goes to peyote parties with Harold True and Kaufman and people who met Charlie in prison. So that is baffling to me. Both are credible, but what are the odds seem impossible that you happen to be assigned a robbery or a hit at a house you already are going to often next door. So this is one of 25 contradictions. How do these stories fit together?
In regards to the Waverly Drive murders, can you, because we see this brought up a bit and there seems to be a little difference of what people think it is, but what can you explain what you think the little black book was and what was in it?
He explained it. Charlie explained it, and I quote him in the book. He said it has to do with all kinds of financial chicanery being run out of the governor's office. Who was the governor? Ronald Reagan. Who got Ronald Reagan into power? Sidney Korshak. Sidney Korshak, who knew Frankie Carbo, who knew Charles Barron, a mafia guy who Jay Sebring knew, who knew Frank Costello. He explained specifically. I mean, we can find it. I deliberately quote it. I explain in detail. Charlie said exactly what was in the black book. There's no mystery about it. Now, did he mean it? Did he mean it metaphorically? Did he mean it really? And then another, there's so many puzzles about this. Charlie didn't snitch about anything. And I asked him this, why he's snitching about Frankie Carbo, but Carbo's dead. And then he implied that there were mob figures involved with the Cielo Drive thing. And when he was very old, I said, well, you're basically implicating your friend Frankie Carbo in the La Bianca thing. Why at this point can you not tell me who these mob figures were that you're saying had something to do with Cielo? But he would not.
Right.
Although I've pointed this out too, that when he did this on again, off again thing about wanting a lawyer to try his case again, and he did later, I said, why last time we tried this in the 80s, you didn't go through with it because you didn't want to tell someone what happened. Why now are you not? And we talked to many, many attorneys at that time, and some of them agreed to talk to him. And I said, why would you do it now? He said, because the old men that would have killed me then are dead, and now I'm the old man. Well, that's if you know Charlie, he's saying the mobsters that who would have had the power to kill him, and who would have been the old men? People like Carbo, people who were in their 60s in the 1960s. So, yeah. So I don't claim to have answers to that. There are many contradictions to these things, but definitely Charlie owed a favor to Frankie Carbo, and that is at least one of the favors.
Right.
Okay.
Now, we've talked about the true crime aspect. I just do want to make it clear, again, the book covers, if you think it's all about true crime, as you know, it's not.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that I like about it is that it's all over the place, because this topic in and of itself has opened my eyes to a whole bunch of different things. It's the spirituality, different types of music, different types of living.
Well, I mean, I think what I got into as far as the cover up is not just about murders. It's also about the degree that Charlie was involved in the highest echelon of the California music industry. That was covered up. Melcher's lies are unbelievable. It's incredible, the audacity with which he presented an entirely false narrative that everyone in the Hollywood world knew was a lie.
Right. And there's so many.
And I get into Melcher's life a lot more than anyone has previously, into his neuroses, into how his financial troubles is what I think led him to get involved with Tex Watson and Charlie in the first place. And of course, I believe he turned to crime to solve his financial problems with the help of Watson. So that's a very important part. The music part, the mystical part, the revolutionary part, all of that is equally important. So I understand people are mostly interested in these crimes, but I don't want to give people the false impression that's all that this book is about.
No, and like we'd said before, I mean, we could do probably at least an hour and a half on every single chapter of this book, in and of itself, because
that's why I wrote it, so you can just sit down and read it and not have to talk about it. So.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
I don't know if there's anyone literate anymore left in the world that, for the most part, a meme or a minute video is about all they can handle, but it's exhaustively in there. You could take one sentence of my book and go further, research it, and that will open 20 other doors.
Absolutely.
Not that by any means do I feel it is definitive. And I did want to point this out, like, it never ends. It will never end. The amount of information about this and different perspectives from different people never ends. And like I said in the first part of the interview, every time I went to Los Angeles in particular, people would come to me with very significant new information. And I'll just mention, like, I want to give people the idea of how much more there is to know about this. It is never going to be over, which is why we not only maintain the Abraxas Circle Facebook group, which we opened after Facebook deleted the Manson File Facebook group for no explanation, for the most bizarre abstract reasons, and why we have opened this new Manson File board, which is a permanent archive, to not only as an augmentation to everything about the book, but the new information that will come out of the book, which, as you explained in your last episode, your watchers can find it at Manson Mafia at creativeforum.com. That's a new board that we've opened. And
we'll link in the description as well.
Yeah, and that's where it's going to be a permanent archive of not just me, but many researchers who are working in this field, many people who know Charlie. I'm done with it. I'm done with this. I mean, the information will keep coming to me, and I will keep reporting it, but I'm not going to do any official project on it.
But it's been so easygoing the whole time.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't think people know how easygoing it's been. Knowing Charlie brought me into the depths of madness that no one can even imagine. The things that have happened to me because of it. I haven't just sat on a computer and looked stuff up. I've been in the real world dealing with people, and it led very early on to very real police harassment, attempts to frame me from the Los Angeles police because I knew Charlie. It led directly to my near murder when my ear was cut off. That wouldn't have happened. It isn't that he did it, but getting into his mandala, into his circle, led to that. It not only hasn't been easy, it has been threatening and malevolent, and I wouldn't recommend anybody do it either.
Well, when I first got into it and started talking to you, you definitely gave me the warning and said, keep your eye on the door.
Right. I've told many people that. I've told many journalists and interviewers who have all gone down the rabbit hole, and I've known most of them for the past 30 years, and I've seen what's happened,
Right. And it's not even people who are that close to it, because we can attest to having crazy experiences, having gotten into this, and just the weird energy surrounding it. But I want to again mention the new Myth and Reality forum, because when we first started out and we were looking for information, the Myth and Reality Facebook page was huge for us. There was you could type in anybody's name, find out all the information that had been spoken about, and then when that was taken away, it was ridiculous. That was a huge.
Well, that's why we years ago created this board, as I've joked, just in case place, which is what the people on the ranch called this little lean-to that they made as a hideaway.
Right.
I knew Facebook was going to eventually arbitrarily ban it, so we already set up another Facebook group and this other. And now we will create a permanent archive there, which researchers can place, very complicated material without being censored, and at whatever length you want, with photographs, and it can be a permanent archive of the whole experience. And again, not just the crimes, every aspect of Charlie's life, and and the peripheral people involved with him.
Right.
But getting back to this endless thing, like I wanted to point out, and I'll get into some of these other things that came to me in LA, just so people understand, I don't even talk about half of what comes to me. Even with this huge book, it's still condensed to what I thought was absolutely essential. Right. There may be things that are more important that I left out. I don't know. There's so much. But just today, and this is a point I want to make, nobody knows exactly what happens with any of these incidents. We may have a rough idea, and we could come to a consensus based on circumstantial evidence. But for instance, here's a minor incident. Everybody knows that there was the legend that Sharon Tate was initiated into the witch cult of Alexander's on the set of Eye of the Devil, this movie that she was filming in 1965 in London, when she was still involved with Sebring. And the story is that, that's why she was killed, because she got involved in this witch cult. That was one of the many rumors in the right after the murders happened, and there are occultists and conspiracy theorists that believe it to this day. Well, my point is, who knows, because everyone in the Polanski circle said that's bullshit. She was not interested in occultism at all. That was a publicity gimmick. They hired this Alexanders and his wife Maxine to make the movie seem more spooky and give it some credibility. It was, and there's a picture of Sharon with these witches. You've probably seen it in a protective circle. So conspiracy theorists think, oh, see, it's, the Illuminati initiated her and they killed her because she knew too much about witchcraft. Well, everyone in the Polanski world said, "Oh no, that's laughable," and I believe them. And there's no proof that she was interested. So today, through a completely roundabout, arbitrary way, I talked to someone who knows Maxine Sanders personally, and she told me directly that Maxine Sanders very credibly explained, "We met Sharon Tate on the set. I didn't think much of her. She seemed," and this is very believable because it wasn't romanticized bullshit. She seemed like an empty, hollow person who had nothing but being attractive. A hollow person with no interest, just a vulnerable, beautiful girl with nothing inside. And she said that she went away from the set for a moment, and that Sharon came up to her and said this very specific quote, whispered to her, "We are sisters now." And Maxine Sanders, the head of this witch group, said, "What?" And she said that her husband claimed to have initiated her. Must have been very brief, within minutes. But that now, as of yesterday, I would have said that's a bullshit story. There is no proof, but there is a firsthand person telling a credible story, not romanticizing it, not making a big deal of it. It's probably a casual thing. But just to point out, every aspect of this whole phenomenon, you say one thing, and then somebody else will come up and say, "Well, it's not exactly how I remember it. I thought it was this. And
it's
I'm not
easy for it to get flipped on its head.
Reports I've heard about the Hinman murder, I don't know what the hell there could have been many other factors there. I can only report what seems that the circumstantial evidence supports. So just to point out, even did Sharon Tate have a mild interest in occultism, or did she not? Even that is Schrodinger's cat. Could be, could not be. And so two other things I'll mention that are remarkable that came from going to Los Angeles. And this is as uncanny as the cats coming to your door, right when we're talking about strangers coming to your door. In Los Angeles, I invited someone that was in the Manson file group. She said, I have some things to tell you, like many people do, about this. And I said, okay, when I go to LA, I'm giving this screening and lecture, I'll invite you. And I invited her to the screening. And we had some correspondence. And me and Mike Brunner, after we appeared together, I interviewed him at the lecture on the 50th anniversary of the crimes. We went to the worst diner in the history of the United States, the only place open. And we were there in the middle of the night. And so this woman who I invited was talking about connections that her family, which is connected to show business and the entertainment industry, had to the case. And she said, Mike Brunner, Charlie's son, in case people don't know, sitting right next to me. And she says, my mother, who was the daughter of a movie star, and I'll get into this later, was walking into Topanga Canyon one day and gave birth to a baby, to a hippie group that needed help. They didn't know what to do. A baby was born. And we said, well, why are you saying that? And then they said, well, in 1969, when she saw the picture of the guy who stuck his head out the window and said, hey, we need help. Do you know what to do with the baby? It was Charlie. So this girl's mother delivered Mike Brunner.
Wow.
Holy shit. Wow. That's incredible. I think we had a little freeze.
On that.
See, again, the cats are going to come to the door.
Cats, I'm waiting. I'm jumpy now.
So what are the odds of that? And then I talked to her mother about a year later on the phone, and she described all of it, which I will describe in another way. Is definitely Charlie stuck his head out the window, said, do you know, we're having a baby, we don't know what to do. This woman had just learned what to do, by the way. She was very young. Wow. She was like an 18-year-old hippie. She said, sure, I'll come in. And she described it all. And it's exactly the right place, the right time. What are the odds of that possibly?
Wow.
That's unreal.
And then another thing that happened at the 2019 thing, there was the opportunity to bring the door from the Tate house, from the Cielo Drive, to the event. That was one thing. And then out of the blue, and I can't mention this person's name, the possibility was, well, a very wealthy person who is a collector of odd artifacts introduced the possibility through a middleman, I can bring the murder car to the event. The actual car that went to Cielo and Waverly. And it exists, and exists, it's under protection. And that didn't happen because of certain paranoia, but the owner basically said, well, can you, in that Manson world, I want to get rid of it. Can you find someone, can you be the middleman to find someone to sell it? So that the authentic car that was at the center of this mystery and nightmare, that appeared out of the blue in the same time period.
Wow. Where did it end up?
It's still available. It's still there. And, and the person does not want to be revealed who owns it, but they do want to get rid of it for, I imagine bad vibes and that kind of thing. But,
I don't want it.
I bet Beckham will want it.
But those are three examples of just stuff that comes to me.
Right.
I don't even
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, those are three of the most striking, but I mean, I can think of many where I meet someone on the airplane. Oh, what do you? I'll give you one last example.
Sure.
And when I went to California to go to Charlie's memorial, I was sitting with a girlfriend of mine in the back seat of a Uber that picked us up, and I mentioned the name Charlie. And this girl who I was with also knew Charlie, on the phone from 1987, had talked to him. I said something casually. The Uber driver, a woman, says, Charlie Manson? There's no reason to say that. No reason to think it. I said, yeah. She said, for the whole ride, she says, I went to school with Ruth Ann Morehouse. No, I'm sorry. Not Ruth Ann Morehouse. Lutzinger. Sorry. Kitty Lutzinger.
Kitty Lutzinger.
I went to high school with Kitty Lutzinger. At that time, my dad took me to ride horses at the Spahn Ranch all the time. I knew Kitty Lutzinger very well. I got involved with a mafia guy who turned me into a prostitute in Las Vegas. Jesus. I got away from him and went to a insurance company run by a guy named DeSantis, who was related to Lino LaBianca, and that was a mob front. So within a half hour, she knew Kitty Lutzinger, who is the girl who snitched on the whole thing, Bobby Beausoleil's girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Went to school with her, described her already being a bit odd and bohemian, and not a surprise that she would end up with that group. Mm-hmm. Spahn Ranch horse driving, and hired to escape from prostitution, got a legitimate job in Las Vegas with DeSantis, who is part of the Gateway supermarket chain ownership. And according to her, why would she tell me? And that was a mob front. She didn't know anything about the case. She just thought, this is weird. This guy knows Charlie Manson, and I had. That was the person who drove me into LA.
Wow.
I don't have to look for it. It comes to me.
And these will be things that, like, little things like this, it'll be nice to, because you don't have to put out another book or anything like that. If you drop something like that on the forum,
well, that's the forum will be for that, and I will say to other people who are equally competent and well informed researchers, look into this, look into that. Right. And it needs fresh eyes. It needs new eyes. It needs people who look at it from other perspectives and have other sources of information. So,
right.
So I think it's necessary to point out, and you may have seen it to a limited degree, once you open this door, it comes to you. And I mean, just today, out of the blue, the Sharon Tate witch initiation is brought up.
Right. No, there's all sorts of weird little, like, we could do a whole nother show on the synchronicities.
Right. And even with that, I'll just mention briefly that woman who told me it was connected to the Ankh, which is Jay Sebring's international corporate symbol. Her name was Sharon. So,
just keeps going.
Yeah. I mean, in this, now what that is, I try to get into this in my book too, in the Element X passage. It's very hard to convey the weirdness of this thing to people who have not encountered it.
Right. And like you say, we've seen certain things. I was at work and I saw a black bus right after talking to you one day.
Right.
I was born near Chatsworth, where a whole bunch of crime was going on.
Right. And Chatsworth, Canada.
Chatsworth in Canada. Yeah. Not Chatsworth there, but, and just weird things like that. And once you see, like, even people that I know who aren't into this, who just know about it on account of I've talked to them a little bit about it, as soon as I started talking to them about it, they would see his face in magazines, hear his name dropped in TV shows.
Right.
It's just everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's like there's a glitch in the cosmos, and it's to do with this.
Yeah.
And where does it come from? Is it Polanski, born in France, and bringing it, who is the center of it? It's not just Charlie, it's everyone involved. And there's a parallel I think people don't see. You have in this whole epic, this whole saga, these two diminutive little guys very driven, very creative, artistic men whose doom brings them together from Cincinnati and from Paris together into this nightmare. And they both seem to be cursed in some way.
Right.
And
Wow.
they both are cursed by inviting a friend to stay with them. Polanski meets Wojtek Frykowski in the 50s at a party at a Polish friend of mine tried to teach me how to pronounce this name. Łódź it's spelled Lodz, but it's the film school that Polanski and Frykowski went to.
Oh, okay.
At a party that was held for the students there, Polanski was put in guard of the letting people in. And this guy Wojtek comes, who everyone thinks is bad news. Don't let him in. He's trouble. He knows these, ruffians and thugs. He's drunk. Don't let him in. He's fighting all the time. Polanski said, you can't come in. And Wojtek charmed him, said, let's have a beer. And Polanski went against his friends and let him into the party. Does it begin there in Łódź in the 50s with that mistake? And then Charlie, meets this guy through Dennis Wilson. Hey, I'm in trouble. Can I stay at the ranch? Tex. Sure.
Yep.
So there are these parallels between these two diminutive guys that like young girls, and there's a lot of similarities there, though probably people on both sides of the equation don't want to see that.
Right.
Well, and another thing that kind of on the topic of the book on how everybody has the two sides to them. Like, you can look at Manson and be like, he's the dangerous dude. He did a lot of criminal things. He's a criminal, but at the same time, he also had a lot of philosophies that you would find in self-help books now. Then on the other side of things with Polanski, which I've done myself, has been like, well, that guy's, underage girls, and he got away with molesting that girl and stuff. Mm-hmm. But he also brought Polish immigrants over from the war-torn country and paid for them to stay in the States, or sponsored them.
Well,
right?
He knew Frykowski was a freeloader, and he said many negative things about him. And that whole group of people, I've talked to relatives of them, they thought, oh, that Frykowski's bad news. And Polanski said, no, he helped me back in Poland. His father gave me money for this film. I'm going to help him move to Paris and America. And he tried to help him, but the guy was a total fuck up. He got him a job making scenery at, I think, Universal. And he quit. This wasn't good enough for him. So yeah, his Charlie and Polanski's generosity, in a strange way, hospitality, is what bit them both.
Right.
So it's a much bigger story. And where's this? Is it Melcher's story? You could argue that. Mm-hmm. Is it Dennis Wilson's story? Who is at the center of it?
Right. Well, I think in the Scanlon Murphy interview, Manson says this person was going for the music. This person was going for love of brother. This person was going for this. And I think that's very reflective of the fact that it's a whole bunch of different things. It can't be put in a little box.
Well, I think too, I want to point out too about the love of brother thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've never said that, of course, that wasn't an aspect of what happened. There's not, and there was never any doubt in my mind when I even heard of the Hinman thing when I was very young. I thought, well, clearly they are copying this pseudo-revolutionary graffiti. They're copying it. But it isn't, I don't know, people so simplify what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I never said that they didn't talk about Helter Skelter on the ranch. Mm-hmm. I didn't say Bugliosi invented it. I'm saying that wasn't the motive for the crimes.
Right.
They were talking about it, and he cleverly said, okay, well, let's make it the motive. Of course, they talked about race war. Of course, they didn't want to start one. They thought one was going to happen. But I don't know, my ideas are very watered down and simplified when they reach the public. So yes, Helter Skelter was real. It wasn't the reason these people died at all.
Right. I think it's the half truths that make it easy for these people to spin these yarns, because there's enough truth in it that if you look, there was helter skelter on the ranch. They were talking about it.
And idiot Krenwinkel as I've said, might as well put Spawn Ranch Chatsworth on the refrigerator, because the police knew they had a little nightclub called Helter Skelter that they had come and raided, and and I think that was just some brain fart of hers. I don't think it was a diabolical plan.
Right.
She, idiot, was listening to Beatles records and they were talking about it, so she stuck it there. And that's what that helped to hang them, because Jacobson and other people heard them talking. But it's not the reason. Same with Love of Brother. And I believe Susan Atkins told the truth once in her life.
Right.
It has to happen. And of course, that's the typical irony of this case. Some of the most truthful things have been said about the biggest liars.
Right. And it's tough to figure out who to listen to and what to listen to.
But after everything I've researched and seen, I believe that Sadie blurted out the truth at the moment of desperation, when she feared, okay, I'm facing the death sentence now. When she was being convicted at the trial, she said, Linda, we needed money to get Bobby a lawyer. And Linda said, these people burned us up in Beverly Hills for this new drug, MDA. Let's get the money from them. That's the truth. But yeah, it's not Love of Brother. And Charlie emphasized this to me. It was Sadie was terrified of going to prison. And she wanted to get money for Bobby to say, look, we're helping you. Don't snitch on me. He claimed it was her idea. So was there? Yes, there was I don't think there was any of this sentimental love of brother. There was fear he's going to snitch on us and we're going to end up in prison.
Right.
And so was that a factor? Of course. And obviously the little pig on the door did not. That's clearly an afterthought. After this mess happened. They thought, well, let's throw that there too. But clearly the La Bianca, they're going way overboard to dupe, even though they hadn't even seen the Hinman crime scene. So let me make it clear. Yes, Helter Skelter was real. It wasn't the motive. Love a brother, or let's do something Bobby-like, was a part of it, but it was interior decoration, misleading interior decoration. It had nothing to do with the motive, which was robbery, which is typical criminal motive. That's it. So I just need to make that clear, because I'm sick of people saying that I don't think those things were factors. They were.
Right. And that's really good, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's huge, and we do talk about the half-truths a lot.
Yeah, they were killing, no pun intended, two birds with one stone.
Right.
And another thing that Charlie said to a few other inmates, and a lot of valuable information came to me from people who knew these people in prison. Tex and Krenwinkel, I have nothing on. They never said anything to anyone. That's amazing, but true. But several convicts who knew Charlie told me, he said, who will it be is expendables, people who have broken their word, people who are worthless. He said that to these. So he meant these people broke their word. And Charlie, he was consistent in believing if you break your word in a criminal deal, you deserve to die.
Right.
And he had no remorse for these people's deaths. None. I can vouch for that. He never did, because he believed, well, they broke their word.
Right.
Well, what did they break their word about? Even with Hinman, in the Hinman trial, people ignore it. He said he was greasy. He was dealing bunk drugs. What's the big deal? He said it himself in 1971. The people act like Bobby made that up 10 years later. Charlie admitted it right away.
Interesting.
So he said this to other prisoners who would agree with him. Yeah, well, if someone breaks their word, you kill them. So the point was, yes, these were expendable people, and that implies, in his view, the La Biancas somehow broke their word.
Right.
keeping in mind from what I've seen of Charlie, he could have been wrong because he thought everyone was breaking their word.
Right. Yeah, he thought everyone was doing something.
And I also have wondered, was there a mistaken identity? Was it, who knows? Because knowing him and his temper and his jumping to conclusions, maybe that's a justification.
Right.
Because he thought he thought Grey Wolf and Star at some points, they're cheating me, they're ripping me off. I don't think they were, he would say that stuff to me and other people, and he'd say it about everybody. So
right.
that's
well,
a factor.
Like you said about your phone call, he thought you hung up on him and the fucking world was over.
If I didn't write to him and say, I heard everything you said, what are you talking about? Maybe he would, he could have said, well, Schreck hung up on me. I'll go kill him,
you know what to do.
Right. Why not?
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah, so I can read back into history that kind of behavior, and I think there was a lot of chaos and confusion and not logical decisions being made.
Right.
Any final questions?
I mean, Danielle, do you have anything else you want to know about? This has been amazingly enlightening, and we've hit a lot of different spots in the book. It jumped around, so I wasn't able to point out as many spots in here as to be like, this was at this part of the book, but it hit all the spots we wanted to know about, and there's so much more in this book than what we've talked about on here. And I think we've
covered less than a tenth of it. Yeah,
I think anybody who wants to know about Manson and wants to know about anything to do with it should be checking this book out, because it is a 3D look at the whole situation and the man himself, his spirituality, his music, the people he associated with, just everything. And there's there's names that you won't recognize, but that are very important to the story itself and connections. And I thank you so much for letting me read this book and have this textbook to learn advanced Mansonisms.
Yeah. Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm not, as you see, most of the interviews I've been giving are not in the Manson community, which is a ridiculous word to call this lunatic asylum.
In the Manson asylum.
Yeah, I have nothing really to say to that. I'm trying to tell people in the larger world what this was about. So this is one of the few interviews I'm giving that is this specifically going to go in. I mean, though I'm sure many people outside of the Manson sphere will see this. This is one of the very few interviews I'm giving of that type. So,
well, thank you very much.
And I wanted to grant it to you. Well, I wanted to grant it to you because you have been sane. You have not been venomous and filled with joke. No, well, not sane. I think.
Wait, Nick, are you talking about Paul?
Yeah. I'm just saying you have been civil and you have been professional, and unfortunately, almost nobody else in this niche has. So that's why I agreed to talk to you. So I appreciate
thank you
that
very
too.
much.
And I think many people appreciate an oasis of civility and sanity instead of the venomous, seething lunatic asylum that you find in so many other places.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad it's coming across like that. We try very hard to stay a course.
I'm sure it takes a lot of medication and electroshock to keep it in control.
It feels like it.
It takes a lot of me yelling at the two of them to stay.
Yeah, perfect. Right. That's right.
So what, any final question to end on?
I have a final question just to kind of wrap things up, I guess. So now that the Manson file will be coming out soon, are there any upcoming projects related to the book that you'll be doing? And are there other projects not related to the book that we should keep an eye out for in the future?
Well, from my perspective, this, the pandemic interrupted my life and every writer, musician, and creative person. This book should have come out years ago.
Right.
It was ready, a certain version of it was ready before Charlie died. We started the Facebook page November 11th, his final birthday, and then on the 11th and on the 19th, he died. That meant I've got to add his death. And then I had to put him in the past tense, because it was Charlie is had to become Charlie was. And then I had to add his death and information about, I thought, well, that won't take long. Then Mike Brunner got in touch with me, and then there was this matter of the funeral and Zach Baggins, which you will notice I didn't get into at all, except I mentioned it in the briefest passing, because it hasn't been resolved yet, still, after all this time. But I did research every aspect of that, and and I have this radio show, which I've referred to, which I did on the subject. So that delayed it. Well, okay, what's going to happen with this trial and this estate and the various personalities vying for commander of Manscam? And that delayed it. So it should have been out in these different versions. I'm glad it didn't, because then even more information came to me and came to me and came to me. But this is part of a larger, in France, in Italy, in England, Germany, all of my books are being republished by various publishers. The Manson File is being printed in a French edition. It's being translated right now for Editions Pansalf, a French company. There are other, and so all of my work, The Satanic Screen, is coming out in Spanish, French, Italian, a new English version. Flowers from Hell is coming out in a new deluxe version. So this is part of a larger project, just to get all of my 20th century works out in a final, revised, updated edition. And it's part of a greater whole. For people interested in the Manson world, that's what they think I do, but that's only one aspect of what I do. And if you had asked me in 1989, will there be any more Manson projects, I would have said, hell no, never. So
don't do it.
Yeah, so I hope not, but there are some tangential things that I am not the central organizer or creator of, that I'm involved with, that are of course certainly involved with it, and some of them are quite interesting. I can't really talk about them yet, but they're not my project. They're connected to other people, and I'm helping or supervising, and I will continue to do that. But I certainly am not going to do any main thing about this topic ever again, and I'm happy to leave it to others. And as I point out in the book, there's many competent, intelligent people who I hope I've left the path open for them to go further.
Right. Well, you've helped us understand
further, and I'll
quite
bring
a bit.
Paul with me.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Drag me kicking and screaming across the finish line.
And then of course too, outside the literary world, I have not recorded since March of 2021, when my last album came out. So I'm going into the studio again soon, and I hope to dedicate myself again to music, which is what I was doing when I got in touch with Charlie in the first place. It was all about music. That's why I got in touch with him. That was what I was doing. That's what our bond and rapport was based on. So I definitely will not be spending the rest of my life talking about what happened in 1969.
Right. The 2 longest years.
Right. 33-year-long years.
Yeah. Oh man.
All right. Well, thank you both for your hospitality and for your intelligent and reasonable questions, and for maintaining, as I said, a sane oasis in a world of insanity.
Thank you.
I wish you and your watchers all the best.
All right. Thank you very much, Nikolas.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. And remember to check out the new Manson Myth and Reality forum for any of the new stuff coming out, any new information.
And that is going to be a permanent archive of all of this that will be continually added to, that will be much more substantial than anything that can be done in a Facebook page or social media, because it's not under the control of any corporation.
Right. Okay. And that's awesome.
And I should point out too that if you want to join that the administrator is always ready to help you join it and teach you how to function there. Okay.
Absolutely. And we did, as mentioned earlier, we did a kind of lesson video with Wiley, who's the administrator there. And so if any of you want to,
that actually, I want to say too, there's a team of people who helped me and who have made this happen. Merlin Nowak helped with the design of the book. My manager, Annie Barta, set up the infrastructure for how to sell it and how the internet works. At the Manson file at nikolasschreck.world, there are people who are fielding any questions about it constantly. Wiley manning the new board, the people who helped me with social media. This has been a very much of a group effort. And, all those people were extremely helpful in making this happen. So, nothing gets done alone.
Right. Well, that's awesome. Yeah. Big shout out to them. And to you. Thank you very much again. And thank you, everyone. We will catch you next time.
Okay. And remember that arrangement we made about this part 2.
Yeah. I'm on it.
Okay.
We'll
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.